the smell of grass and leather. There were days when we'd play too. We'd cross the lines when the sun would shine and make our dreams come true. I had a glove on my hand and a girl in the stands. She stole my heart like a hit and run. It seems the world was so much simpler back then. We was just out there for fun. I pray for someone to hold your hand, and baseball in the summer, someone to walk with you when this world grows cold. Baseball in the summer, baseball in the summer.
BrockvMac Legendary Rivals podcast on a absolutely stunning Sunday, and I'm joined by McMaster Hall of Fame pitcher Brad Arms, who is probably overwhelmed with the desire to wind up with a fastball and drill someone from Bell Media right in the ribs. Brad, how are you doing on this Sunday?
Pretty good. I'm happy now that my 2-hour and 20-minute call resulted in what I wanted. But yeah, we spent some time on the phone with Bell, looking out at how sunny it was. So been better ideas, but we got our stuff done.
Consequently, this podcast, I'm good. Consequently, this podcast is not brought to you by Bell. I'm just putting that one out there. Brad, look, it's been almost, we're talking 29, 30 years thereabouts. Yeah. Between when we were all playing and very active in on these university teams and where you are today. Why don't you give everyone a little teaser as to what you're up to today and where you're centered in terms of your life?
Okay. I'm actually in Caledonia, so I'm not too far from where you are now. So I'm in Caledonia, Ontario. I've been back here for the better part of 5 years, moved back from Vancouver. Then there's some to that story. So right now I run Grand River Wealth Management. I do financial planning for farm families. Started a business from scratch in COVID, found a bit of a direction of what I like. So that's where I am business wise, and have bought a house and set down some roots here in Caledonia.
I'd say you're not far from a guy that played on our team, Todd Nye's home base, because he Caledonia Nanticoke guy, and yep. So Southwestern Ontario for sure. That's amazing, and we'll get into your journey back from Vancouver. And running your own business takes a certain amount of moxie and a certain amount of courage. So we'll obviously get into that, because entrepreneurship is, I think, a unique spin. You may be one of a few that do it on the McMaster side. We have 6 of them on the Brock side, so
it's a lot.
Interesting from that perspective. Mm-hmm. Why don't we get into the hot tub time machine here and go back to where you grew up and your origins in sports, family, and baseball prior to McMaster. Whereabouts did you grow up, Brad?
I grew up about 10 miles from where I live now. So I grew up in Mount Hope, Ontario. Both my grandparents were dairy farmers. And I had the pleasure of living with my grandparents and my family on the Arms side till I was probably 6 years old. So I got a lot of exposure with 2 of my uncles, Paul and Glenn, to pretty much every sport possible, right? And my uncles weren't much older than me. Paul was, a handful of years older than me, and Glenn was a few years older than him. So my introduction into sports was, Paul was the youngest of 7 siblings. And then there was me. So I was the one that got to lose at pretty much everything. They'd put me in Glenn's goalie gear when I was like 4 years old, and they'd shoot pucks at me downstairs until I screamed. So I got a pretty good, honest look at sports right from the get-go. We were a sports family. We did a lot of stuff outside. And it's kind of what you did.
Well, and there's another thing I think that's quite common. We have this with on the Brock side with Todd, as I mentioned, but Matt King is another guy, and the Houston brothers. When you grow up in in a farming community or in a farm type of life, there's also a work ethic that comes with things. You learn real quick that, life is more than just your own little stratosphere. Tell me a little bit about, hard work and learning the appreciation of that.
Well, you're a dairy farmer. You grow up on a dairy farm. You milk cows twice a day. Doesn't matter if it's Christmas or New Year's or Easter or whenever it is, right? Like they get milked twice a day. And there were days even as I grew up and went to school, sometimes you'd go do chores before you went to school, right? Like there was lots of play time and lots of outside time, but there's just work that gets done. And the old adage, make hay while the sun shines. It's legit, right? You cut a field of hay, you rake it, and it's ready to bale, and it's going to rain in 2 days. You bale hay for as long as you possibly can to get it all done, right? So it's just you learn to do it. You also learn the places in the hay mow to go to sleep while other people are doing things. You find the places to hide, right? So it works both ways. You get a little bit crafty on getting other people to do some things too. I remember, and even on the farm, my uncle Glenn, he probably got me as exposed to baseball as anybody. He actually won a national championship playing fastball out of Bimbrook. So he'd have been an 18-year-old in, call it 1980. And I remember being a bat boy for a team that went to the Canadians in Summerside, PEI. It's still one of my earliest memories. And they ended up going to the Nationals out in Edmonton. And I can still remember going to those things. So I looked up to him like crazy baseball wise. And they would, I remember him and his buddy Jim, who went down to Alabama for fastball. They used to tell me to go around to the other side of the barn and they'd hit fly balls to me.
Oh,
yeah. So they'd tell me to go around the other side of the barn. I'd stand there with my glove and they'd go do something else. I'd wait there for hours at time, right? To go back there. So you learn a lot. You learn a lot on the farm. You learn a lot about hard work. You learned a lot about family, getting stuff done. You learn to have a bit of a sense of humor too, and got an idea on what a pecking order is, right? Like that, all part of life.
Absolutely. And so were you playing sports in high school and grade school?
Yeah.
Did you start to get into organized stuff at this point?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I was going to go play fastball, and fastball didn't exist in Bimbrook. And so I went to play Little League because there was no underhand, right? That's all I grew up with. So I went to play. So I played hockey and baseball for us that are 49 years old, right? That's what you played when you grew up. So I played lots of hockey, lots of baseball in Glanbrook. Still have got some friends today that I started playing with in Glanbrook, both hockey and baseball wise.
It's amazing. And what positions were you playing in both?
Hockey, I always played defense. I was slow as molasses and couldn't score very much, but I figured out from a pretty young age how to play positions. So I could figure out where to kill. I was good at killing penalties. So I managed to play house league for a while, played some rep hockey. And I played and liked it a lot. I tried out for junior C at 15. And I didn't like that. Like I had no interest in fighting and wasn't fast enough and couldn't score. So I kept playing and went to play midget and played midget rep. I ended up hockey wise, played high school hockey in Ancaster. And that was my first real exposure to good, fun team sports. Team sports at the school level, right? Like it was really, really good. So as my coach used to joke with me, you're not the most talented defenseman here. You matter a little bit, but you're a right-handed defenseman. We're not putting you on the left side. You're not that good. So you hung around and grounded a little bit, but I played with really good guys at Ancaster, and we had good teams there. It was a lot of fun on the hockey side. And I would say through high school, I probably paid as much or more attention to hockey than I did to baseball.
Yeah, it's a pretty good jaunt from Nanticoke out to Ancaster, so lots of driving, I
Well, no, we're
suspect.
not. We weren't that far. We were in Mount Hope at that point. So
Okay.
Mount Hope's like Caledonia, Hamilton. It wasn't that far. We just didn't have high school, so we would have had to go either to Orchard Park. So I ended up playing in Glanbrook with Bottomley and Dixon, just to kind of put it in perspective. So those guys would have went to OP, and I went out to Ancaster.
My condolences on that, by the
Yeah,
way.
I know. Well, you take the good with the bad, right?
Yeah, a couple of real malcontents, those two.
Absolutely.
So do you remember where you were kind of leaning towards in terms of your university selections as you progressed through high school?
Neither. Like I didn't think I was playing any further, right? Like
Okay.
hockey I would have tried, but in my last game of high school hockey, I separated my shoulder for the third.
Oh, geez.
So I was done. Like it just blew up like a forest fire. I was playing defense and they moved me up to the wing because I figured out that you can go play against when we were playing Saltfleet, you go check their best forward. And I could. Right? That's all I could do, but I could do that. And I tried to do a Mogilny move and got hit and the shoulder got just pounded. Right. So
Hmm.
hockey, for all intents and purposes, was done. Baseball, I don't know. I could throw the ball hard enough, but not that much. And you know what it was like when it was our age, there was no university baseball in Ontario when I was coming up. I didn't have this. I didn't have the skills to go think about playing in the States. So when my shoulder blew up in hockey, I thought I was done in terms of anything I was going to go play beyond intramurals. Right?
So did was I obviously, school is going to be a selection of something academically that
Yeah.
you want to do.
Yeah.
And Hamilton, obviously McMaster makes sense because it's close,
Yeah.
proximity wise. But did you apply to a couple other schools like everybody else
Oh
did?
yeah.
And
I'm at McMaster because of Western Business School.
okay, explain that one. That's
So I
a really
went. I was getting out. I was done. Didn't want to be home. I'm not living at home. I'm leaving. So I thought, okay, I was pretty good at school. I liked math. I had a taste of economics and thought, well, where do people go? Well, you go to Western Business School, right? That's where you go. How do you get into Western Business School? Go take undergrad, take Biz take Biz 20, and then take Biz 257. You get into Western Business School. There's your path to do basically whatever you want. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to do that. I unfortunately was smart in high school. I didn't really learn to study that well. And when you get to university with all the other smart people, the ones that learn to study, they tend to do a little bit better than those of us that maybe don't build some good habits. I had friends in high school that were a lot of fun. Marks weren't really all that important to them. So let's just say I could have made some better choices that way. But long story short, I survived my first year of Western, did okay. And then I remember it was the midterm for econometrics with stats, second year. It might as well have been written in Greek. I don't even know what my score was. I walked out of that exam and said, that's it. I'm done. There is no point to me continuing at Western. I'm not getting into business school. I'm not ready for school at all. Let's figure out how to salvage what I've done. So I figured out what letter of permission was. And I could stay going part time at Western. And one of the schools that was letter of permission, I could go to Mac.
okay.
And I could start taking some classes there. And I found a carpenter who was willing to be at our place. I knew him, and I'm like, I need some work. Like, I'm going to school. It's not working. I have to keep my toe in. I don't want to stop, but I'm not learning anything right now. So I went and worked with him. We rebuilt the restaurant. I went to Mac on letter of permission and kind of just salvaged the second year of university and legitimately probably kept myself in school by about 3%.
Well, it's pretty interesting to understand that you're an original Western Mustang,
Yeah.
and so that's pretty interesting side pivot there. And tell me how you kind of go from, are you So you're working a little bit. You're just keeping the embers of your
Yep.
university education going. How does that lead to kind of restarting and refiring that engine and discovering baseball at Mac?
Shane Toohey. So Toohey, he played at Mac, and I played with him at Glanbrook.
Okay.
Right. So I still played senior ball at Glanbrook. I was still playing. And Toohey said, Mac's got a baseball team. I'm like, huh? I don't even know this exists. You should come out. So I figured out on letter of permission, I shifted to Mac the following year. So this would have been Billy Newton's last year of playing before he coached.
Okay.
Graves was hired. I think it might have been Graves' first year as coach. And so Toohey drugged me down that, right around Labor Day, just after, and I went and tried out for baseball. And that was the first year when Reeson was there, Lunny was there, Cooper was there, and that whole crew kind of showed up. So I'm post Gwendon. Like I had never met him. I was the year after everything happened there. And so that basically, Toohey telling me to come out, still liked baseball, still played. When I separated my shoulder, I lost 10 miles an hour, but I figured that I could make a ball move right and I could throw a fork ball.
Well, that's all it takes, eh? It's there's been lots of people who've carved out great careers, even at the major league level, who've endured arm injuries. And I read a book about R.A. Dickey, who obviously threw a knuckleball, but he had no ulnar nerve in his right arm.
That's a great book.
Yeah, so really interesting from that perspective. And wow, so Shane recruits you into the mix. And do you remember what your initial thoughts were of, what was that tryout process like? Because at Brock, it was a hardcore camp that went on for 2 weeks and there were 50 players at it. What was it like for you? Was it more of an individual tryout? And
no, it was pretty well run. Like Donnie had it set up pretty well because it was him and he had Henry Romanowski and there's a fellow named Kevin there as well. Left-hander, did some stuff with the national team at one point, I believe. And it was set up pretty well, but I remember walking in there and I thought, why does everyone here seem to think they're so good? Like everybody was pretty, like everybody, most guys on that field, like they were pretty confident ball players, right? Like you'd watch Reeson take ground balls, you watch Cooper carry himself around and that, and you're like, wow, these guys really seem to think there's something pretty special. And then there's the Billy Newton aspect of it too. And I'm like, who's this guy? Right? And what does he do? So no, it was set up pretty well. Like there was a lot of guys taking ground balls and there were a lot of drills going on and they, I could pitch or said I could pitch. So at least that probably put me a rung up and gave me a better chance of making the squad. Because if I had to walk in there as an average, second baseman or shortstop, probably couldn't do it. But the tryouts were like, it was every day.
Okay.
You were going back every single day. So we were down at Alexander Park, but you were coming back day after day after day after day. I'm like, this is really kind of cool. I've always wanted to do this in baseball. And it was never that much, right? Like, I mean, you get some of it when you played midget and around Ontario time and around playoffs. But this was like, you're coming back to Alexander Park every day at 4:00.
Yeah, and you're right. The MAC team was pretty jammed up in the infield. Like it had a lot of really good infielders. Maybe not so much in terms of arms and pitching. So you got the great name to be a pitcher for sure. But tell me a bit about your, and one of the unique things is you guys didn't carry a pitching coach, which was very interesting for us Brock types because we had a head coach who was a pitching coach, and we had a pitching coach who was a pitching coach, and then we had a student coach that helped with the pitching coach. So there's a lot of support for the pitching. So you guys would have been more reliant on each other. Tell me a little bit about your teammates who, there was a lot also of position players who also pitched at MAC, which we didn't have at Brock. We had one that did it. Tell me a little bit about the other pitchers on staff and how you guys either egged each other on or supported each other, those kinds of things.
Yeah, we all got along pretty well. Like it is, you know, pitching. I wouldn't say pitching was necessarily our strong suit. It ended up working out for us. Like especially my first couple of years, pitching was our problem. There's no
Mm-hmm.
like if we had something like when we went up against you guys or went up against U of T, like we could hit with you guys. We could play defense for sure, but pitching wasn't there. Like if you were a staff that was really going to go all the way through, I should not be a starter, right? Like it just at that no at
Yeah.
that point with those guys, no, I wasn't that consistent that you were going to say I'm just going to take the ball here for 7 innings and shut things down. It wasn't that. I was my first year, so no, we worked like it was. I don't want to say it was casual because it wasn't casual by any
Mm-hmm.
means. But the pitching staff, like between Pinot and Lunny and myself early on, and then you had other guys that kind of came in and tried and filled in a little bit. Tim Butterfield did. And then, by the time we got to the third year, Gibby came in and Brett Gibson was probably the first real big addition we'd had to the pitching staff in a long time, right? We kind of pieced it. We pieced it together. But if Lunny and Pinot weren't good,
Yeah.
our staff wasn't great, right? It didn't work. We were really, really reliant. And the way the schedule was set up, it worked, right? As I could be the third, like early on, because how it started and how it finished were very different pitching ones.
Yeah, it's a unique thing. We had a totally different structure at Brock because we had 3 times the number of games. We had the American schedule.
Yep.
So we had to carry a independent 10-person staff. And so, we had 9 to 10 pitchers every year, none of whom played positions. And it's one of the differences in the two programs is,
absolutely,
and look, the hard part is we would have some lightning in a bottle scenarios, right? Chris Ebel or myself, who probably should have been pitching in the US for whatever reason, not pitching in Canada instead. And other unique situations where we have kids that need a little more polish to be able to get there. They need another 4 or 5 miles an hour on a fastball or that kind of stuff. And Canadian programs really struggle for pitchers because the reality is the good ones get plucked off to the US a lot easier than the position players do. They go there, especially in those northern schools, Canisius, Niagara. If you're a pitcher that's got anything, they're going to bring you down there because it's hard to find. It's just
and it's worth taking a chance on, right? They're going to find they've probably got plenty. You can be a really good third baseman with a good stick, and they've probably got lots of those.
Yeah.
Right. And it's hard to find pitching. So yeah, I think that it was one of the things that was, I would say the least organized and the least consistent of what it was. Like even in my first year, like I started and played first.
Yeah. Yeah. You guys could just construct it differently, a smaller roster and more flexible. Tell me a little bit about your early interactions with the team leadership. So there's senior guys there when you first come in, and it's Reeson and it's Cooper and it's these types of players, and I think you're probably looking at it very accurately as a freshman coming in and going, wow, these guys, really have a bit of a swagger to them. And, but the reality is when you dig in with some people, you learn things about them. Tell me a little bit about, and a lot of the MAC guys have spoken about how the vet guys were pretty good about making them feel welcome and doing a good job of making them feel a little at ease and protected a bit from being pushed into the deep end. But tell me a little bit about your interactions with the more senior guys at the MAC team.
I was probably in that senior guy camp, right? Because I showed up the same time as them.
Okay.
Right. So like Reeson, Lunny, Cooper, me, again, talent wise, I don't just belong in that pool, but I'll put them in that time frame because we showed up at the same time. Like to make a joke about it, I've lost more jobs on that Mac team than anybody. I lost my job as a starter. I hit over 300. I lost my job at first base because we got Jeff Filardo at the end of the year, and then and I lost my closer job too, and I got put in middle relief. Right. So what I would say is, but your comment though, okay, about how what I think the senior guys did really, really well as we grew over those years was exactly what you said. Right. Like the younger guys that came up, we kept them from feeling like they were being thrown into the deep end. Right. Like games against Brock or games against U of T, whatever it may have been. Like it's good. It was pretty intense, right? And I think that those younger guys had a comfort because of just the quiet confidence that Lunny had. You knew he walks out there, he's got that little grin and that hop in his step when he's walking out to the mound, right? And laughing around, and we'd all chew tobacco, and he maybe would maybe ask us if we had bandits, and then he'd say, "No, I can't do that." Right. So it was Lenny. He was so good and so carefree and never said a thing to really anybody. But for anybody who watched him and how he carried himself and just the joy and the fun and whatever version of confidence that is that he played that game, you felt good. Lenny went to the mound, you felt good. There's no two ways about it.
I've seen his son obviously plays at Brock now, and his daughter played hockey against my daughter for years. And, Doug carries himself in that very kind of happy-go-lucky, quiet way. Yep. His daughter is the reverse. She's just a beast. And
good for him. Good on him.
And the funny thing is, I was more like his daughter, like as a pitcher, as an animal, and everyone knows that. But my daughter is very much like Doug. So I don't know what the hell was in the drinking water, but apparently it just skips every generation, or it switches a little bit. But I think that's great because it sets a great tone. And obviously you're investing some of your leadership qualities in making sure that these young folks feel that they're not failing. And that also includes, how are you finding the balance between school and playing at this point? Because it's it's a pretty intense season, and it comes right at the start of the school year and can be challenging for some people that don't know. Like there's not a playbook. No one comes to you and says, "No, you're going to have baseball here, and that's going to be a lot of commitment. You're going to be on the field 7 days a week." Tell me a little bit about that.
It legitimately, Mac baseball saved my university career, period.
Okay, that's a strong statement. I care to back that one up.
I figured out what the library was. I had to go to practice every single day. And it was so much fun. I loved going. Wouldn't want to miss it. Shag flies for 3 hours. Talk to Cooper and bother him and make him angry and ask him what it's like to be from Newfoundland. And then he'd get really mad, right? Like all that stuff that you can do for him. But it just was. It forced me to go to school. So okay. I treated baseball like the most important class that I had. And that caused me to make every other class matter because I didn't have time. You had doubleheaders on Wednesdays. You had doubleheaders on the weekend. You had practice 4 days a week. Maybe you got a day off. That was it. Yeah. So literally, it forced for me. It forced me to take school more seriously, and that wasn't just by the last year. That was legitimately for those 3 years that I played at Mac. It absolutely saved school for me.
That's great. And I think more people need to hear that message because, there's still, especially now with kids going to university at 18, 17, some of them, you got to understand that if you want to do the things you love, you got to do the things that require the work as well. Right.
And freedom is one thing, but some structure is really nice. Right. Yeah. And it carried over. Like, was I as perfect in February as I was in September? No. But you just built some, and I think baseball starting at the beginning of school helped, right? It forced, like for me anyway, it helped do that. So we would take the time, and I mean, it was important, especially with the younger guys, right? That were there by the time we got into our second year, and especially in our third year. Like, I ended up being president and captain of the team and I was the 24th most talented out of 25 guys.
Hmm. Well, but listen,
Right.
it takes something inside you to step up, and the administrative role for these teams is not easy. Like, I will
No, it
say that.
wasn't, and I think that part of that happened because of the time that we spent helping the younger guys out, and I just talked a little more.
Okay.
So they're like, oh, Armsy's kind of the one we look to, not because I was any better at helping somebody out than Brad Reeson was, or that it was just me, right? And so that's what I think we kind of figured out as a unit coming up, and I saw that as, I'm not going to be as important playing wise as these guys are, but what can I do to help here? And that was, sometimes it was a run to talk about nothing to do with baseball with somebody because they were having a tough time.
And this is great because I haven't talked to anyone who's had to deal with university admin. I have had that unique. I won't call it a privilege. It's just a unique thing.
It's not.
It sometimes was horrific to deal with the university admin.
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about that, being the president of a on-campus sports organization and what that was like.
You'd end up going to a lot of meetings where you didn't really matter that much because they still wanted to consider you club.
Yeah.
Right. And that was the hard part, was you trying to get support that way. Don Graves was really helpful that way, though, because he had a relationship with the administration department at Mac. So when I needed to have a conversation with somebody, we were able to have conversations with people. Really fortunate to Cam Dunlop, who still works at Mac. He was great, and he was really helpful in helping organize what we needed to organize and get everything straight, like right from, what, you're ordering your own uniforms. Like, no one's doing this. No one's doing this stuff for you. Right. And I think, and having the continuity of Billy Newton having been there and played, and then so right from the genesis, and still being there as a coach, if I needed to get things done with the school, he could at least kind of point me in the right direction to go to get it done, because we weren't varsity. So you didn't really have or weren't considered varsity when I first got there. You didn't really have that much of a voice, right, to get what you wanted to get. We didn't have a baseball field, right? We played at either Bernie Arbor, or we played at Alexander to practice, or we played down in Dundas.
Well, I think one of the good things is at least you guys were able to get uniforms that reflected the school colors, as opposed
eventually, right? Those original, the first T-shirt that everybody had, the blue ones, the Mac baseball with the 33 inches, 30 inches, 33 ounces.
Swing it, baby. Yeah,
right?
No, it's
the Billy Newton special. It's perfect.
Well, I small steps, and the hard part is at the time when you're there, it's like, I want all of this now.
Yeah.
We're more organized. We bring in more tuition to this school than the fencing team does. but you people choose to fund the fencing team and treat us like we're ultimate frisbee playing in the local park with 10 people from and I don't look at that as, to all due respect to people who are into ultimate frisbee intramural sports.
Yes.
But we are representing the university.
Absolutely.
And, it's frustrating, but I think part of it is they want to test the staying power of the people involved. They make you wait out a few years, and, the programs that exist today, if those would have been the ones you and I would have been affiliated with, our lives would have been a lot easier, because you're not chasing funding as much, right?
I remember running a 3-on-3, trying to run a 3-on-3 basketball tournament to raise money, right? Like, it was just like, what could we do to try to raise some money for this team? And you talk to guys, and I remember we get to design our own jackets, which was really cool. But if we had hoods on, we had to pay an extra $10, right? Yeah. Like, those are the kinds of conversations you have.
Yeah, it's
right?
really,
it was neat, right?
Yeah, you learned a little bit about business in all of that, right? And more so the politics of a university campus, which could be their own podcast. It's
absolutely, that is a separate.
It's a little bit like dealing with the Kremlin. So, Brad, tell me a little bit about your memories of this, of the big rivalries. So obviously you guys had a more personalized rivalry with Durham College for whatever reason. You have the memory, you have the rivalry with Brock, which I think we can definitely touch on. And there's U of T in the early days, and that might transition over to Western when the sport develops a little bit.
Yeah.
But, the one that stands out is obviously the BrockvMac
Absolutely.
Scenario. So tell me a little bit about what you remember of that.
Okay, so that was the one that mattered. Like, I think the Durham College, it lasted until Billy was a coach, and then I think that slowed down a little bit. Like, it still did exist, but there'd been enough turnover that it wasn't as big eventually. But from day one when we got there, it was Brock. Well, we had to if we were going to win, we had to beat U of T, and we had to go through you guys, right? So those were the games that everybody would get a little more excited for. You could play Western, you could play Waterloo, you could do that. It was good. It was fun, right? Still a bus trip, still a road trip, and get to do that. But the games against Brock were just, they were different, right? Everybody came with a little bit more of a focus. I remember we had a tradition. Reeson had a tradition with our household.
Okay.
So we lived on. So a lot of the guys lived on campus. I did not live on campus, right? So I lived off campus at Reginald on Locke Street, not far. So we were kind of the place where to go. If you wanted to get off campus and go hang out with some baseball guys, this is where you could go. So what we would do is the night before Brock games, Reeson would come over for dinner.
Mm.
And we would make dinner for, because he was the one that mattered, right? So we'd make dinner for Reeson, make sure that he was looking good and all ready to go. So before every single Brock game, Reese would come over and we would have dinner. We just stumbled onto it one time. Like, hey, you got Brock tomorrow. Come on. I'm like, come on over for dinner, right? We'll have right? We got to make sure everybody's good. Nobody's doing anything stupid. Come on over. And then he had one of those days and had a really good one. And we're like, okay, then we do this. Every time we play Brock, Reese, you come over for dinner and we make you pasta. So that was one of the things that started early on, happened in the second year, and we kept it going all the way through.
That's amazing to hear. And baseball players are a traditional or a superstitious bunch.
Absolutely.
They did you have any crazy superstitions as a pitcher that you just kind of had to do every game or every warm up? Was there something that you remember out of,
I didn't have anything extra crazy. I had, after in hockey separating my shoulder the third time, I had to stretch a lot. I got so I basically would do some weird version of yoga, contorted, laying down in the field. And guys would look at me like, what are you doing? And I'm like, you've seen my arm. You know it's not any good. You know Graves is going to make me warm up at least 3 times. If I get to pitch today, I got to get my legs ready. So I guess that was my kind of superstition ritual. The other thing that I did for the entirety of the first season, but didn't do it after, when I discovered Redman and Big League Chew. We would mix that together and have that every game before that. But no, I didn't have anything too weird.
These are things that we will have done, but we did never advise to kids.
No, we never would. I can still remember getting 4 hits when I had Cherry School.
Yeah, it's we had a coach that had a spitter on the dash of his Cadillac, so that'll tell you everything you need to know there.
That's amazing. But I can remember games we're playing at, like, I can still remember points in time.
Okay.
Like, I can remember we were at a game with you guys in the year, so 97, and we were at Brock. And the game went into extra innings, and Scott Ralph was coming up. And Henry Romanowski yells out at him, "End this thing." pull something inside of that pole. I can still remember. He hit 3 pitches later, hit a ball out to right just inside the right field pole. And I'll remember that forever, right? And it was fun. Like playing you guys was great. Like I played junior ball at Glanbrook, so I played with Jess Dixon and I played with Ricky Bottomley, right? And so many guys knew each other, right? It was fun. You know, wish everybody well at the beginning of the game. Hope they completely fall flat on their face for the whole game. You don't want to win 2-1. You wanted to win 20-0. I didn't have any interest in being good games, right? Want to beat you guys as bad as humanly possible. And I remember even like the intensity was different. I remember the first time I pitched at Brock, I'm nervous, right? Like I'm out there. It's a tight game. 6th inning. I get thrown out there. I threw 2 pitches inside. And I mean, not 2 feet inside. I mean, 6 inches inside. Newton takes off his mask, starts running out to the mound. You want to win this effing game or what? And I'm like, okay, yep, this is where we are. This is BrockvMac. I get it.
Yeah, Billy was a teammate of mine, and so I've thrown to him before, and not the most diplomatic catcher you're ever going to come across. And you know, that's kind of... So when we had Fletcher, he was just like another Newton, for God's sake. Totally. So, you know, it's just a long line of catchers who are salty and give it to you as a pitcher.
It works. And I played against Fletcher growing up too, because he played in Dundas, right? So that was the cool thing. Like more than any other team, U of T was good, and some of the guys knew some of the guys that played there, but it was just so much. Everybody knew at least a handful of guys on each squad, and I think that made it different.
Yeah, and I've talked a little bit in these series of podcasts of the contradiction between the two schools. So you have McMaster with these high entrance marks, Brock, and with the traditional university faculties, so medicine and these kinds of things. Brock at that point's a young university; it's under 30 years of age. They're having to be innovative about stuff, so they launch sports management while we're there. Brilliant. They do a few things, but you know, we were all living with the if you can walk and talk, you can get into Brock scenario, and you know, like it just was, you know. But and then the contradiction in the two baseball programs is unbelievable too. Ours was seen as corporate and like a machine because it was set up that way. But you guys are more like a traveling band of pirates that. You know, is a little bit loose and arg, you know, it's kind of fun that way. Brad, tell me a little bit about like, so when I did the Don Graves podcast, he talked about you being a guy that always wanted the ball, but also had a variety of pitches and was always tinkering and working away at it. Tell me a little bit about, because, you know, being a pitcher, I kind of love this stuff. Tell me a little bit about your process as a pitcher and, you know, was it always just the quest to get better, or how many pitches did you actually have, and how many did you develop on your own? Because you guys didn't have a pitching coach, so that's interesting.
I probably developed 3 on my own, like, and just to like, if I could throw 80, that was monumental. Like I wasn't throwing like at 16 I could and then break the shoulder and everything happened. So my right shoulder sits probably 3 inches lower than my left at least. So my mechanics are being what they are. I learned to throw a forkball.
Okay. It sounds like a really important pitch for you. So tell me how you learned to throw a forkball.
So it basically came down to the fact that I could throw a curveball for strikes whenever I wanted. So I had something that could break inside on the lefty, right? My problem was my fastball wasn't enough to throw on the plate to keep anybody honest on the other side of the plate. Okay. I could not pitch inside. I couldn't pitch there. So I could throw enough of a 2-seamer that had some bite down and in. I was probably actually a more effective pitcher to lefties than I was to righties, right? Okay. When I finally figured out the 2-seamer, I can throw it. It's going to break into the righty. I can throw it to break really hard away to the lefty. And then they started to kind of figure that out. And I kept tinkering. I'm like, okay, this is my bread and butter. I have to throw the two-seamer. What else can I throw that looks kind of like it that's going to help? And that's when I stumbled on to a forkball. So I used to drive around. I had an old Chevy S10, and I would take a ball and I would just jam it in between my fingers and hold it for as long as I possibly can. Because what that did, it made my 77 mile an hour two-seam fastball seem like it had something, because my forkball was 10 miles an hour slower.
That's interesting. It's a hard pitch from a touch perspective, right? It must have been maddening when you were first trying to throw it, because you bounce it a lot and it sometimes hangs. And how often did you practice it to teach yourself a pitch at that age? That to me is
every day. We'd throw every day, because that was, again, like I lost my first base job. They wouldn't let me do anything else. So I just pitched. But I learned, like, and what I figured out is the best thing I can do is to make myself as durable as humanly possible. So if I can just throw every day and get my arm used to throwing every single day on those weekends where we had double dips on Saturdays and Sundays, I didn't have a 10-man pitching staff, I might be able to, if I can figure this out. Gravesy wasn't wrong. I wanted the ball all the time. I just wasn't going to get it for long periods of time.
Yeah.
But I bet you I can throw in 3 out of 4 games this weekend if I keep playing around with it. And because I had 3 pitches, if I had 2 working that day, I can live with that, right? I could live with a fastball, forkball on one side, or if the curveball was working and one of the other 2 was working, at least I could throw to either side of the plate.
Yeah, that's great. It's great to hear that it's a sound technical reason for doing it.
And the other thing I said, and I was talking to my one boy Reese, who's 11. I said, I love playing at Mac, and one of the best reasons playing at Mac, I said, was the double play. He says, why do you say that? I said, because if our infield defense was so good that if you got a ground ball, I'd just start walking off the field. Like it was done. And I would. I played on good senior teams too, and they were wasn't quite that way defensively. But when you had that Reeson, Lunny, and that's the thing that I had too. So I wasn't Lunny, so I didn't lose me as a third baseman when I pitched. So when I went in, I had those guys playing third and short and second, and then Husey at first. Like, this is done. Like, if I get a ground ball, I'm getting a double play. So all I thought was just figure out ways to get him to put the ball in play and keep it down, and you'll make outs. Right?
That's it.
And that way I could keep myself in the game longer too, because I'm not trying to strike guys out.
That's great. It's great to hear. And that's a philosophy that would have went over big at Brock, because we were all about that. Tell me about winning a national championship, what that was like and how that felt.
The process was one of the most enjoyable processes I've ever had, and I'll ever remember. It wasn't that season wasn't exactly smooth. Like, it ended well, but there were some adjustments that had to get made over the course of that season. Guys with playing time, right? We had besides Cooper, we had another 6 outfielders that were all about the same talent-wise.
Yeah.
Right? And so you'd have, and the way it was is you would get guys, I'm not going to say disgruntled, but they start all summer. They hit 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th all summer. And they come there and at the beginning of the season, it's fine, right? Because you're all there and you're all excited. And by the end, it was fine, because everybody got enough at bats that we played ourselves into the spot. But in the middle, it could get a little bit messy in the middle. Billy being a coach for the first time was an interesting process too, right? Him doing that. I remember on the bus, and that was a bit of a weird separation, having played with him.
Sure. Yeah. So it's also Bill's got a specific personality,
We're sitting in the back of the bus, and we're driving along, and he says, "If there were men on first and second, and Ken Griffey was up, I'd make him bunt." Going on about all this, mechanics and playing baseball the right way. Look back at him. Reeson had that last week, and you let him swing away, right? So it was fun to be able to do that with him. But it was great. Like, it was a really, really fun season. Like, Pinot cementing himself in as the closer. It worked, right? Getting Gibby as another starter. It worked, right? And I was able to, I didn't really have another job to lose outside. If I was still going to play, I became the swingman. I was the guy who went down to the bullpen. I was the first guy to the pen, right? And we found our place. We had, Matt Fortuna was there and showed up as a catcher, and Grilly was there, and Grilly really was coming into his own. He's one of the best, most talented athletes I've ever played with, and incredible what he did from starting out the way that he did. And I think that, getting that infusion of younger talent too, combined with being Reeson and Coop and like McGrail and McGregor and Pinot. Well, Pinot ended up going to school forever, but you're looking at it saying, this is kind of, if we're going to do this, guys, for us that were graduating, this was it. And the talent pool that left was still really good, but you thought, right? Like, even if I was one of those guys, I'd look at it and say, here's going to be our shot, right? Here's going to be a really good shot. So there was a little bit of added pressure there. There'd be times when Gravesy and I would butt heads a little bit. I could butt heads with most people. So it was a great journey, but not without some bumps, right?
I think that's called constructive discord, or at least that's what my
That's a good term.
management book tells me that it's supposed to be. But people who care about winning, it's different if you don't have a pulse, eh? Yep. Those types of people that don't care, don't butt heads with anything, because they're just not awake. So, 30 years gives you the perspective to be able to look back and go, I kind of understand that behavior now a little bit. It's hard to juggle 6 outfielders in particular, or that Brad Arms guy. He really wants to go through a wall to win, and he's just, you're going to be a senior guy. So the guys that are disgruntled, they're going to come to you all the time. I had that for sure in my role at Brock, and you handled it with a lot more expressiveness than I did. People would come to me, and then it would kind of go in the vault, because I knew that our Coach McRae, was his vision was one that required kind of absolute buy-in, at least initially, and then that allows you to adjust once that train track is down. You guys had been operating for a few more years, so there was a little bit of adjusting. You guys are doing lots of little adjustments along the way, and that's kind of one of the big differences of the two teams. They both win national championships in a small span, but one does it with a whole bunch of adjustments and kind of constantly tinkering away, like you guys would, and ours was very rigid. It was here's a system, plug you into the system. Yeah. Here's the result of the system, right? And very unique from that perspective. So, Brad, what I think before we leave this chapter and start getting into your journey after Mac, and you've talked about him a little bit, but tell me a little bit about your namesake, Brad Reeson, because he's a big void in a lot of people's lives now. But it's important for people to understand, not that this was just a talented guy, because I think everyone knows he was an incredible player, but what he was like as a human being and as a teammate, from a friend and just a warm guy kind of perspective.
He was great in every aspect. Brad was just somebody that you really enjoyed being around. From a baseball perspective, he took it seriously, but didn't take himself too seriously, right? You'd see him, he'd feel a little bit of pressure, but he could still compartmentalize it, that it's just baseball. And if it didn't go well, he'd go and get those leather lumberjack gloves, put those on and go hit another 200 balls, right? Like you can solve anything. So that, but he was like, he was able to, quiet guy for the most part, but he was able to balance a busy baseball schedule, a degree he took very seriously. I could tease him that you're getting a degree in gym, like you realize this, right? And he'd be okay with it, right? He'd have that little blush. Oh, Armsy, come on, it's harder than that. And he'd do that. And you could still get him, you could still get him socially out to do things. And I for a guy who shouldered a lot of the load of a team, you wouldn't really know it. He was so even keel, and I would even say that, and just in knowing him for the years that I did, and going to school with him at Mac and seeing him outside of baseball, he was even keel. It was Reeson. You knew what to expect, right? You were going to have a good conversation with somebody. He was probably going to be pretty happy to talk to you. Didn't let things get him down. Just was, he was a super guy to hang out with. And you could introduce him to people that he didn't have a whole lot in common with. It was just fine. He rolled with it, right? And I mean, good parents. And I remember, I still remember talking to his dad. His dad would be there quite a bit too, right, for games, and talking to him. And just, it was, he was a great guy to have played with and been around. And I've seen a lot of guys who have not nearly his amount of talent that thought they were 10 times the player he was, right? Like it was just him.
Yeah, it's a really great thing for you to say, Brad. And we'll kind of tell me how your Mac career winds up and what your steps are immediately in the aftermath, and kind of your journey coming out of McMaster.
So Mac ends up, we win nationals, and I will, I'm not going to give a whole lot of advice on this, but I will give a little bit. Enjoy journeys. Like, I can still say the process of winning nationals felt better than actually winning. Strange as that may sound. I don't know, but it was so great to have done. And winning, it wasn't a relief. It was still, yeah, this is really great. And then you're like, oh, we just won. Have some fun. What's next? Right now it's over. What's the next journey? Right. And it was strange, because it's great to go and win your last game, but you don't get to play again.
Yeah.
Right. Like it was strange for me. And I went and I tried to play senior ball. I couldn't put in the time and effort and energy that I put in to Mac. I didn't have that everyday structure. And it didn't, I played a couple more years here and there, but eventually I didn't pitch there either. Right. So that was kind of the wind up for, like, obviously the pinnacle was winning nationals. And I think I had some enjoyable time in baseball after that, but nothing could compare to it.
Yep.
Right. And that was that was strange for me, because I really got bit by the baseball bug to the point where, that was all I wanted to do.
Well, it's sometimes an achievement is something that is a good period, right? And maybe that resonates onto other things, and maybe that same passion you're bringing to baseball, everyone struggles with the transition of how to take that emphasis and that focal point, and put it into other parts of their lives. So, it can be your career development, your career, it can be relationship, getting married, it can be all those kinds of things. So why don't we find out what, we know that you're now looking to park or redistribute this energy that you've put into baseball at a very high level. You've played, you've had to pivot 1,000 times on your position. You're in the administrative position, which is always difficult. You're dealing with some big personalities in the Mac program for sure. And, what do you decide to do?
So I stayed focused, managed to be able to graduate in economics, really good program at Mac. Stayed focused on school, got that done, and then have an affinity for economics, like to be outgoing, figure I need some kind of a sales job to do this, wasn't ready to go and start my own business by any means. And so I explored the world of investments, right? So for probably the better part of, the next 5 years, actually worked in Burlington at AIC Investments for a while, got an opportunity to go west. So I moved to Vancouver in 2005.
Okay.
And there for the better part of 15 years.
So was it a hard decision, or it just felt like a new adventure for you? Because Vancouver is pretty far away from family and stuff, right?
It was. At that point, I got to go be a wholesaler, which is a lot of fun for a job. You get a budget, you get to play some golf and take clients out. It was right up my alley, right? Like in your kind of mid-20s, getting to do that. And it was either I go to Vancouver or I could take the territory from London to Windsor. And I'd driven that 401 enough to say, no, thank you. Don't want to do that. Hey, I'll go try Vancouver. So yeah, it was a big change at that point. Really not knowing many people at all, right? To go out there. So no, it was, but it was, Vancouver was a good place to be. I learned a lot there, made a lot of friends there, made some really good connections there over time, and worked for enough organizations that I figured out I wanted to eventually come back here and work for myself.
Yeah. So tell me, I don't think people who haven't been to Vancouver or spent an extended period of time there don't understand the differences between life in Vancouver and life in Ontario, and they're pretty significant. So Tell me a little bit about what you feel is different about living in Vancouver. It's not just pretty mountains and rivers. There's a lot of big differences. So I'll leave that to you, because I can weigh in, because I've also spent some time there.
Yeah. There's two things that I had to learn to deal with pretty quick in Vancouver. Number one was the cost of living. Like, unless you were living in downtown Toronto, Vancouver was way more expensive than anywhere. And that's with all due respect to even Oakville or Burlington or whatever it may be. Like, Vancouver is a very cosmopolitan, desired city for the most part in downtown Vancouver. And there is a little bit of, oh, you're not from here, right? And it's, oh, you must love to work. Oh, you're not from here. Isn't it so much better here than there? You're like, hi, I've known you for all of about, 3-4 minutes, and you're telling me that where I grew up wasn't any good, right? So you learn the way I learned to deal with that, we hate Toronto mentality, because if you weren't from Vancouver, if you were anywhere east of Winnipeg, you lived in Toronto.
Yep.
Kind of that simple. The only thing that I figured out that I could say that was the truth, that didn't hurt somebody else's feelings, was I like both places for very different reasons. Right? And I did. Like, where I lived in North Vancouver, I literally could go skiing after dinner. Right? I could paddleboard in the ocean. You can do that. You can golf and kayak and ski all in the same day. Right? You can do those things. So it's different. There's some status there that's super important. Like, there's a little bit of there's some ego there that I, even for my time when I lived here in Toronto, I never really got that sense. But Vancouver, and maybe that was just because I was who I was, right? Like, I don't know, what was your experience like?
Well, I had to manage the Vancouver, the Calgary, and the Winnipeg offices of the National Sales Division of Quebecor. So we didn't own a lot of property, a lot of properties in Vancouver. We just had the Vancouver 24 Hours newspaper there.
Yep.
But in Calgary we had the Sun, and in Edmonton we had the Sun, Winnipeg Sun, all the Sun newspapers, and 220 community newspapers, a couple TV stations. So I had to go out there to deal with the advertising community. And I commonly say this about Vancouver. It's like they invite you to a party, but when they find out that you are not from Vancouver, you get invited to a party, they put you on a balcony and shut the doors, and everyone else is inside having the party, and they make you stay out there while it rains and it snows and it does everything else. And they might let you in after a year, because
Maybe.
there's a natural kind of mistrust of people that are not there day in and day out and that haven't lived there their entire lives. And that's hard to deal with. What I will say is there's generally a better attention to work-life balance than there is in Ontario. And it's kind of more of a Euro style of working too, where you would combine your leisure pursuits or lunch or dinner with your work, much more so than in Ontario, where there's not really an after 5 culture here, except on Bay Street. So, you're not meeting your clients at 9:00 at night to have dinner because you got a family and you got a commute and all those kinds of horrific things. In Vancouver, there was a little more of that blending of, hey, let's have a business lunch, and business lunch is also a social lunch. There was a little bit more of that, but to your point, it's really hard. It's a huge adjustment coming from the east to the west, because it's not the same. If someone comes from Vancouver into Toronto, my typical reaction, or what I've seen, is people are just curious. Tell me about skiing or tell me about this, but they don't penalize the person from where they, and that was one thing that I did notice was different.
It does happen. And the funny thing is, you mentioned Saskatchewan. Half the people that didn't like you because you weren't there were from Saskatchewan, right? Like it was different, and something that never really fully went away, right? Like it does lighten up because you make you have a decent social circle and that, but it never really, I don't exactly know what it is. But the one thing I would say is, you take someone, the work-life balance part. If you took a little Ontario hustle out there as a salesperson, though, you can do well. Yeah, right. You can do well, and you can still balance some stuff out. What I liked about there, especially for finance, is that the day started early, right?
Oh, so absolutely.
You could get a lot of stuff done by 2:00. So if I did take people golfing by 2, I'd already been at work since 7. Talking to people.
And the markets are closed in the east, and
it was an early start there, so I did quite like that.
So what you're really saying is, you get up, probably still to this day, you're a very early riser, right? Like 5:30, 5:00.
Yep.
Yeah, amazing.
That hasn't changed.
So, what prompted the decision to move back from Vancouver?
Family decision that I needed to make. A personal decision that I needed to make. I've got a daughter who is 15 years old. At that point, when we moved back, she was 10. I was looking at a divorce that I was going through and wasn't willing to do that out there with her as an only child. It wasn't the right thing to do. She's got family back here on both sides. So we picked up and came back. So it was the right thing to do. That was the catalyst to have it done.
That takes some courage, for sure. I've been through a divorce myself, so it's a catastrophe. Like, it's horrific to go through.
Yep.
Logistically, and then eventually it's kind of like blowing up your entire life, and then eventually you sift through the rubble and you rebuild. So it sounds like you made a decision that was to provide more of a support structure for your daughter, and probably for you too. And
absolutely.
Tell us about how gratifying it has been to rebuild on your own terms, because launching your own business has probably been part of that.
Yeah, and basically I was trying to transition with a group that I was with in Vancouver to kind of we helped financial advisors retire out of the business that didn't have a business plan to do it, and we'd done this pretty successfully. I came to Ontario to try to do it, and then the appetite by my former employer kind of stopped. Understandably so, I get it, it's fine. So I started my own business in May of 2020. So we were right smack dab in the middle of COVID. and started with nothing.
Yeah, it's got to be incredibly difficult because you're in a business that requires face-to-face contact,
Yes,
right? You
it
can't.
does.
People think it's really easy to conduct any kind of sales or relationship-based business over Zoom or Teams, and it's not, because you don't get the same read and you don't have the same connection to
No,
someone.
for some people you can as a media as a check-in for 15 minutes once you develop a relationship with somebody. But no, like I'm really happy with where we've come to. I mean, gone to the point now where I've helped 3 advisors retire or in the process of retiring out of the business. They didn't have a transition plan for their clients. We've retained most of the clients. We've grown the business. I've now hired 2 people, and even got to the point now where for the business I have in Caledonia, we're doing financial planning for farm families only. It's an important thing to me. The world needs more farmers. There's no
Yeah.
question. We really would be good to keep the family farms around, and they have significant problems to solve, important problems to solve. I've got the skill set, the knowledge, and probably more important, the curiosity to continue down that path, because I don't have it all figured out, not even close. But I've got a good basis in what direction to go, how to help people deal with that massive change in life in transition. And it's not your traditional retirement planning business where someone's walking out at 65 with a pension.
It's really interesting. So I spent a few years in my career managing a media group that handled a big chunk of Midwestern Ontario farm country. We had
Okay.
agriculture reports and the whole 9 yards. I was involved
Yep.
with the farm show and Woodstock and the rest of it. You know, it is very complex from a tax perspective. So, you see a lot of unique investments in things like RVs and pools and new combines every few years, because it's about
Yep.
managing tax exposure more than it is anything else.
Yes.
And, so that's got to be a really kind of a challenging, because it runs counterintuitive to the way most people have to manage your flow. Rainy day fund is literally a farming scenario, because you could have a drought, you could have
Absolutely.
an infestation, you can have all kinds of different things. Are you dealing with all kinds of different farming, like
Yes.
from dairy to beef to
I've got
crops?
I didn't even realize that ginseng was grown in Ontario, and I've got a ginseng farmer. Like it is, I have the most unique, interesting clients. Like I can take like my girlfriend Ingrid, she's got 2 boys, Reese and Till, 8 and 11, and I have a daughter Callie who's 15. And Till's got a serious interest in farms. Like if he could do anything, he would have a dairy farm. But we can drive along and we can see the fields. He's like beans, corn, right? For clients that we have. So it is completely, it's a completely different niche, and I love dealing with them. They're super smart business owner people that take massive risk, like you just talked about, that most people can't.
Yeah.
Can't even imagine, right? Like everyone thinks the farmer's all simple. No, those combines are driven by GPS,
Yeah.
and they like the programs that they have just for, you know, people say, why do farmers use so much fertilizer? They don't. It's expensive. They don't want to. They now have this technology that says on this part of the field, when we've got this much rain, this is how much we put on it. Right? Like it is unbelievable the changes that have happened in that industry, and what it takes to keep up with what's on their mind.
Well, and I think the other thing is, most people don't have to live their life with leverage. They're leveraged to the point that they've got a mortgage likely on their
Yep.
house. But a lot of family farms, the whole operation is leveraged. So it's an immense financial requirements, a lot of stress. There's just a lot of things that go with it, and a lot of mistrust. It's hard to build trust because they're being approached on all sides a lot of times, because they are
Oh,
independent businesses, and there's different seed genetic seed companies. There's all kinds of different suppliers for everything that they've got there, and everyone wants a piece of it. So yeah, it's a really cool place to be, and you must, so you're spending a lot of time developing trust.
Yes.
So that's got to be a great place to be every day. Do you enjoy
It
that
is.
part of it?
It's great. I do, and I think that and my industry hasn't done itself any favors, right? Like we get to a certain extent, there's a certain amount of mistrust that gets pushed towards investment advice, financial plan, whatever term people want to use. The industry's earned it, right? So there's that extra layer then of what do we need to do to build and continue to grow that trust. And there's the second part. You can trust somebody. Like I've got friends that I trust, but I wouldn't get them to do anything because they're not really all that useful. So there's the how do you create that trust? And then can I hear what they say, figure that out, and then help them solve a problem or move in the direction of a goal that they might want to accomplish, right? Can I take that information they'll tell me because they trust me and do something productive with it? And that's what I strive for. If I can get there, and we get there, the greatest compliment the one client had said to me, he says, Brad, I don't fully understand everything you just told me. I understand most of it, and I know you've got my best interests. And I'm like, thank you. That I'll take that all day, because I don't expect you to understand every little bit of vocabulary we use. We'll get there, but that matters, right?
Just as you don't need to know every inch of yield that they develop to have their back, but that's a great place, I think, for you to be. Obviously, given you could kind of piece together your journey and how it leads to that. Tell me about living life in a blended family. That sounds like a great development for you.
It's awesome, and I don't have to coach, and I just get to be a baseball fan, a lacrosse fan, a hockey fan, and a dance fan. It's awesome. We have three really great kids. Ingrid and I, we get one of the benefits we do get every once in a while is we get weekends by ourselves for a little bit of adult time. This is one of them, so that tends to be a lot of fun. But yeah, like we've got Till being the youngest. We've got grade 3, grade 6, and then Callie, my daughter, is in grade 9. So there's that part of blending too. The 3 kids act just like you would expect 3 biological kids to act, right? Callie's 15. So she'll play the good older sister and hang out, and then gets really annoyed because the 8-year-old and 11-year-old won't stop fighting about stuff. Like it is exactly as it's supposed to be. So we're really, really blessed. Got 3 really happy kids that all get along. It's a pleasure.
It is wonderful and challenging at the same time. I have two daughters who are 19 and 20, so they've been through that stage, but I know exactly where you're at. So, that's a unique spot. So that's wonderful, Brad. Let me kind of give you a little bit of a platform on how do you think your university experiences and the experience, which was really robust, your Mac experience where you're dealing with 1,000 moving parts and lots of different, how did that translate into your renaissance and successes here later in life? How do you think that gave you the tools to do that?
It's a really good question. I think that my time at Mac helped me deal with a lot of different personalities, all kind of thrown in at once, right? Like when you walk into a team like that, a lot of different personalities, and if you're going to win as a team, you might not like everybody, and they might not like you. And you know what? That's okay. Yeah. Right? Not everybody has to want to go out for a beer after the game. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but it is what it is, right? So I think I learned that that I could be myself, and there weren't always people that would agree with me, right? But I think that being myself was important. I learned that both up and down, right? So I'll always remember that I could tell Don Graves whatever I wanted to tell Don Graves, and sometimes he'd tell me to quit being a pain, and he wouldn't listen to everything, but it was okay, right? It wasn't the, well, you don't say that, you don't do that, right? So that's something I always remembered and respected of him, and I think I took that later on in life. And it's like you brought up the dealing with administration at the university level when you're trying to start something up, right? Or you're maybe not starting it up, but not getting the ear that you want. Sometimes you got to get a little bit creative, right? Mm-hmm. You've got to, maybe it's not this person exactly, but if you can figure out, this person over here might be able to help me influence where to go for help to get your message out there. That absolutely I learned from my time at Mac. And the other thing is to stay busy. If I keep a schedule, I do really well and I'm efficient. If I don't keep scheduled, I don't get a whole lot of stuff done.
Yeah, we all have our own working style and our own living style, and I'm like you. I got to live off of a to-do list that is required. But tenacity, I think, is another aspect that I know you haven't tooted your own horn, but as someone who's observing what you've said today, it takes a certain amount of tenacity to not to keep pivoting and to keep making changes in your life for the better. And I think you probably learned that at Mac, where you had to adjust from being a starting pitcher and someone who was probably anticipating doing one thing, and then it changes, and then it changes again, and it changes again.
Yep.
And, you've also done that in life to where you are today, where if you don't learn to cope with change, you're not going to be very successful, because these are, some of what life puts in front of you sometimes is really difficult to navigate unless you've had the experience of doing it before. So that's pretty amazing, Brad. I really, I think that's wonderful.
Thank you.
After, you guys obviously had the reunion in 2018 where you kind of celebrated being enshrined in the McMaster Hall of Fame. Is there anyone that you didn't get a chance to talk to, or that wasn't at that particular reunion that you're hoping is going to poke their loving face through the visitors' dressing room at Community Park, George Taylor Field, in 6 months?
It's a good question. I think I saw most everybody that was there. I don't think John Matobi, I do not believe, was there. He was out west. I really hope that he ends up coming for sure. I didn't see Henry. I hope to see Henry.
Yeah, that's a good way for us to end. Is, we've had a lot of, Henry is kind of like the mad genius. Okay. And we've spent a lot of time on the mad part sometimes because it's funny and we get a good snicker out of it.
Yep.
But I was really struck at the last podcast that I did with Michael Grilly about how Henry personally invested his time and his effort to make sure that guy became the best he could be.
Yes.
And we talked a little bit earlier before we got on together about you had a very, again, a treasured relationship with Henry Romanowski. Tell me a little bit about what you think of him as a coach and as someone that had an influence on your development.
I think Henry's one of the smartest baseball minds I've ever been around. Scott Ralph doesn't make shortstop. If not for Henry Romanowski, I mean, I yelled at him to go back out and take more ground balls that night in Dundas too. But Henry would stay there for 3 hours, and he keeps saying, like, go further, make that throw from the hole further. Like he had a sense about him and a timing about him that just worked. And it was like when he called Ralphie's shot, other times I'd seen him, say, move over here 4 steps left, and someone would hit it 4 steps left. So he had that part about him. But he had a way about him, like he would say it about Grilly, and he would say it to me. He says, that is the most talented person we have on this team. He said, physically, he is more gifted than everybody, and if he puts his mind to it, he could go pro. So Grilly didn't go pro, but I think if you lined up his post-Mac career against most other people, I think it was probably pretty good. Like, I don't think there's too many guys who pitched with Mac that went on to pitch as well as he did in senior. And he had a way to make you feel good. I remember it when I lost the thing that really put the death nail in for me for my first base job. We were at Waterloo, exhibition game. I didn't get in the first game. I'm like, not going to get my chance. And I got in there. Ball gets hit, shortstop. I go to the bag. I get the throw from Ralphie at short. Didn't even touch my glove. Hit me right in the chest.
Ooh,
like I missed it completely. I'm down. Henry yells out at me, "What's wrong, Armsy? Lose the ball in the sun?" Right? That's what he did, and that's what I think was sometimes misinterpreted about him. And it just his sense of the moment and things that would need to be said, and nobody else could say them in a way that he did. And he could just, and maybe I spent more time with him than anybody else. I don't know, right? I spent a lot of time with him, but he'd point out little things. Like, yeah, you're right. And I could have watched that 1,000 times, and I never would have saw it.
Yeah, some people see the game differently and play the game differently and think the game differently. Yeah. And you know, it's hard to place at the moment, right? Because when you're living in the moment, it's kind of like, well, that seems just a little bit different than what I'm used to.
Yes.
But when you have the benefit of being maybe 5-10 years, or in this case, 30 years removed from it, you're all of a sudden like, wow, that is genius, right?
Yeah.
So,
and he was such a good coach, and he was such a good, like, Don Graves was a great coach. Technical baseball skills was not his forte. Wasn't. Yeah. He was a really good leader. He knew, like, he was good. So Henry was, they were, I don't know if it's yin and yang or whatever, but they complemented each other really, really well. And I have so much respect for Henry. We wouldn't have won with the coaching staff that we had. We don't win without Henry. Like, there's no way that Mike Grilly would have been the catcher that he was, just in that short span of time.
It's amazing to hear, and I think a really good pointed way to cap this one off, Brad, because you know, what I'm cognizant of is, you know, the good thing about these programs is everyone had their moment in the sun. We all had a good game, or we all had contributed to an important win, or a coach helped turn a player. But, you know, with the absurdity of some of it, there's some like, there's just some crazy stories. There's no other way of putting it. I always want to make sure we balance that off, that people understand that there were very talented baseball people and players behind these programs. And that's what separates them from the Georgian colleges that played for a couple of years, or the York team that's been in and out, or it's the staying power and the enduring nature of these programs is due to a lot of the investment of tons of people. But, you know, if you make the misstep early, these programs are 4 or 5 years old, and then they peter out.
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
You know, I think their endurance and their staying power has a lot to do with the quality and some of the genius of some of the people involved. So thank you so much for today. I'm not going to become Bell Canada and keep you for 2.5 hours, but it's been really amazing. And, you know, we look forward to seeing you in about 6.5 months' time.
For sure. And thank you to you for doing all of this, right? Like, you think all of these take it's an hour and a half of my time, and it's an hour and a half or 2 hours times how many of these that you do. So thank you for everything that you're doing. It's been great to listen to the ones that I've listened to, and I look forward to doing more. So we appreciate you doing this, Mike.
Thanks, Brad.
Okay. Have a nice afternoon.
Thanks.
Well, the smell